You're listening to the Governor's Podcast, which is hosted by school governors for school governors and for all involved in or impacted by education governance. On the Governor's Podcast, we have open, honest, and transparent discussions about governance in the UK education sector, sharing and providing insights into the realities of entering the boardroom, sitting around the governing board table, and leaning in.
Hello, I'm Sharon Warmington and I support schools and academies as a governor, governance practitioner and a clerk. I'm also the CEO of the National Black Governors Network, supporting the education sector in diversifying their governing boards.
And it's Olivia D Hinds here, an under 30, unapologetically black female who is changing the face and space of school governance.
And you're listening to the Governor's Podcast.
Okay, let's get into today's topic.
What does being the only one in the room really mean?
Oh, I think being the only one in the room right now, to many people, they think of their ethnicity, they think of their age, they may even think of their skill set, but being the only one in the room could be anything that you bring that you think that the majority of the people in that space do not.
I think it depends on the room.
Yes, is that true?
Because, in one area it could be gender. Mm-hmm. As you say, race is a big thing at the moment, especially in the work that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. But it can be gender. It can be, in your case, age. Mm-hmm. Or it could be specialism.
Yeah, there's that too.
So what does it really mean? I think it's
subjective, right?
Yeah.
It comes down to the individual, how they even feel like they're the only one in the room, because for many people, unless you're self-aware, being the only one in the room is the fact that you're new, full stop.
I was actually gonna say that, however you come to the space,
yeah,
the one thing you will be is the newest person in the room,
mm-hmm.
unless the governing body that I joined, I think at the same time, there were two other governors joining, simultaneously. So I didn't feel quite that I was the only newbie. Mm-hmm. But it was weird because I joined the governing body during lockdown. So I actually haven't even been into the school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So sometimes around that table, I do feel as if, am I the only one who doesn't know, where Mrs. So-and-so's class is, mm-hmm. or where the head teacher's office is in relation to the school. So, mm-hmm. being the only one can have different hats, really. But how do you get past it?
Well, I think part of it is your personality. So if you think of being new or being the only one in the space, think of what you would do if you were networking. So when you go to networking events, how do you mingle with other people? Do you find out what they do, what their skill sets are? I would say before meetings start, that's a great opportunity to really, what do they call it? Like break the ice kind of thing. So before the meeting gets into the formal structure, you kind of just ask, how was your weekend? If your meeting's earlier in the week, like if it's on a Tuesday or something, or what are your plans? It just allows to break that ice so that you then don't feel, especially if you've got a governing body that is quite cliquey.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, because some people, in my experience, some governors live quite closely to each other, mm-hmm. or they've been on the governing body so long, mm-hmm. it can feel as if there are cliques and,
Yeah.
and groups within groups
yeah.
of the governing body. And so, that in itself could be, am I the only one who leaves the meeting at the end of the meeting? Where everybody else seems to stay for that chit chat, but not so much now because obviously it's virtual. But, that was one of the things I did find quite isolating actually, because you do feel like, what are they talking about?
I guess that then comes down to your personality and your level of comfort with self as well, because I knew that I could see that happening where this is pre-COVID, pre-lockdown, when meetings were face-to-face. And I would notice that after a meeting finished, there'll be 3 or 4 governors who would, they don't seem to be getting their coats or packing up their laptops and their paperwork. I'm like, hold on, but the meeting's adjourned, like it's finished. It's like, let's go home. And this is when it's in the autumn term, so it's dark outside.
Yeah.
And I don't care if you're driving, like it's still dark. Have you got families to go home to, kind of thing. But for me, I was like, pick up my bag and go.
Yeah.
I am fine with it. You want to sit there? Cool. I'm going home because that's where I want to be right now.
Yeah.
I came for the meeting, and I think it's partially because of the work I do. Entrepreneur, work from home anyway. So me going back to base is normal.
Yeah.
Whereas for them, depending on your age, if you're retired or if you work day hours, so from 9 till you do a 9 till 5 job and stuff, that's your social time.
I was going to say that it's part of their socializing, and I say they because I don't do it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is a race thing. Because we just go. Meetings finish. Black people just go. We just go.
Yeah.
What else is there to talk about? And I've noticed that. But as you say, also age. A couple of times when I was a parent governor, I sort of just disappeared because I had children at home that I needed to look after and all that kind of stuff. But as a clerk, sometimes I do hang around and just sort of eavesdrop, almost like a fly on the wall. What are they talking about? Kind of thing. And it is just a social aspect, and people may not have seen each other, may not have spoken to each other since the last meeting, or if they're on different committees, so I find it probably more after a full governing body meeting, just as a way of catching up. And a lot of people now, governors, say that they miss that aspect. That's what they miss the most about live meetings, is that
personable interaction.
Because you just can't do it virtually. I've heard people suggest that, the Zoom is opened up, say, 10 minutes before the meeting's due to start, to give people that opportunity to catch up and things like that. But I think we're just in that mindset where the meeting starts at 6, so we just switch on at 1 minute to, or within seconds of, or for many 6 o'clock on the nose, or 5:30 on the nose, and you're just ready to start, rather than having that slow build, because you haven't got the situation where people would say the meeting starts at 5:30 and they finish work at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, depending on their length of travel, and they get there 10 minutes before, and so they're making a coffee and all that kind of stuff, and as
making
people
that
are
transition
and as people are joining, you're sort of exchanging pleasantries kind of thing. All that has gone.
That's interesting you say that, because you just going back to a point you said just before that one, you mentioned how as a clerk you may sit and listen, and so I guess that brings in the position that you have, or the position that you play, the role that you play, the responsibilities that you have in that governing body space, because I think that's another thing, the way to kind of integrate yourself into a culture, because every governing body has its own culture, I would say, because it's made up of the different individuals that come into that space. And so one of the ways that you could integrate, I guess I'm giving a solution to a problem here, if anyone feels isolated, is putting yourself forward for things, to do something. Get involved. So obviously the clerk may already be assigned. So I'm not saying the clerk's role is up for grabs, but maybe it's, if you've got a committee structure, then it may be a case of nominating yourself for a committee chair position, or it could be link governor roles. Obviously, if all the committee chair positions are filled or they don't exist.
That gives you something more to talk about, and it makes you feel more connected, because if you... going back to when I was a parent governor, although I had a link governor role, it was really a non-role. It was for training and development, and I'm talking about in the early 2000s, so governance was different back then, and it wasn't really anything. It wasn't really a role that required me to do anything. But now, when you've got a link governor role or a committee chair role, there are additional responsibilities. So those additional responsibilities include having almost direct conversations with other governors and possibly other members of staff. So that in itself will
gives you something to
get
involved in.
So when Jane walks through the door, it's like, hi Jane, how are you? How's work? How's the family, kind of thing. You then have that connection. Whereas if you are and when I say just a governor, I don't mean you're just a governor.
No, but you're a school governor with no additional...
If you don't have any additional responsibilities, then, and you are only attending one meeting a term, or two, depending on how many committees you're on, then it can feel quite isolating. And so my advice would be, as you say, get involved, take on a responsibility. Or as you prepare for the meetings, think of questions and things, because by asking more questions, people will begin to see that you even exist.
Yeah, who is this? Oh, right. Okay, this person speaks all the time. I'm going to remember their name and see what kind of questions they ask. So then you no longer become the only one. You become more a part of the group. But you're someone who brings something different. And in terms of like taking up responsibilities, it's not that you do them all at the beginning as soon as you're new and you join, or you wait after a year. It just depends on when the natural cycles come round. You never know. At any point, a governor could stop being a governor because they've got other commitments that or their terms of office, is that what it's called? Terms of office come to an end.
Really? You're a governor and you
don't
know
but that's just that's all that stuff. But
well, your term of office, dear.
Well, it's all good. So those come to an end, and therefore an opportunity may open up. I know for me, just my personality, the way I am, I was like, I just want to, I guess I was green. So I was like, when an opportunity came up, I'm like, yes, I'll do it.
And that's the beauty of ignorance, because when you don't know, when you first join, I always say to people, when you join the governing body, lean in, just take on a role. And some people are like, oh no, I can't do that. Just say yes. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, you don't need to be perfect or anything.
And so ignorance is bliss in that respect, because I think the longer you are on a governing body without a responsibility, is the harder it becomes for you to take on a responsibility.
Because then you spend so much time seeing other people do it, and then you try and compare yourself. Oh, I won't be like them. Well, you don't have to be.
You don't have to be,
So for me, just to kind of add a bit of context to what I've said already, I think I was maybe 6 months into this position as a governor, and I put myself forward as the chair of the Teaching and Learning Committee. Now, I wasn't nominating myself to become the chair.
At what, 25, 26 years old?
Yes, I was... So
talk about leaning in.
I know. So this was about 18 months ago. And how it came about is the chair was not present at a meeting. And obviously, they need someone to chair the meeting, even if it's not the officially named chair.
If the chair is absent,
or sent an apology.
The governors need to nominate someone to chair that meeting. So it's not to take over as chair, but to chair that meeting.
Specifically for that meeting. And No one else put their hands up. So I was like, well, someone has to do it. And I'm looking at people who have been there much longer than myself.
Yeah.
People who ask a lot of questions
Yeah.
and things. And I was shocked that they didn't put themselves forward.
I find it amazing that people who have been governors for sometimes decades, still don't volunteer for things. And I think, well, why are you here? What are you doing?
I know. So I was kind of waiting for them to say, because for me, it was just an expectation that someone who knew the school and is familiar with the structure and I guess older, then they would go for it. But when they were almost like, it was like being in school again.
Nobody wanted to volunteer for anything.
They're not even making eye contact with the head or the clerk or anything. So then I said, I'll do it. Because I'm thinking, it's just for the meeting.
Yeah,
it's not for the whole committee.
But they obviously knew what you didn't know.
Yeah. There must be. Once you volunteer, it's like, okay, Olivia's already put herself forward. So it's like, okay. So I did it for that meeting. And then I think the next meeting was at the beginning of the new academic year. So you naturally, every year, you go through the cycle of, will the current chair want to continue? Does anyone else want to nominate themselves? It turned out that the chair of that teaching and learning committee actually was leaving because he was moving to a different location geographically. So commitment-wise, it just wasn't going to work for him.
And then everyone looked at you.
And then I was like, by then, I was thinking, well, I've already chaired a meeting. Not perfectly, but no one expected me to be perfect. They were just glad that someone nominated themselves.
Well, nobody can be perfect.
No.
And especially in the governance space, I find that those who almost put themselves out as if they know everything about everything are not good. They don't...
not effective governors.
Yeah. They're not.
Yeah, because you've got to recognize that it's a journey. You're continuously learning. If you think about what school governance has had to be like over the last 12 months because of the situation that just came from left field, no one as governors knew what was going to hit schools. And so it was just a case of learning to adapt. And I knew, as just being self-aware, that I am agile and I am adaptable. I embrace those characteristics. So if I embrace them, I have to action them. I have to actually show it. So that's how I got into it, and I absolutely love it. I do.
So you being the only
black,
only
one under 35, I would say, on both of the governing bodies that I sit on.
Okay, for me, I'm not the only black. I'm maybe the only one who has the governance specialism that I have. And I'm very aware of that in my questioning. And I'm increasingly aware of when people almost like turn to me in a virtual space. Yeah. Like, what does Sharon think when it comes to policies and things like that? And I suppose that's because when you're looking at policies, I can scan them and I know exactly what I'm looking for, because I just, I live and breathe policies. So, but that can also make other people
feel intimidated.
Either feel intimidated or feel lazy or be lazy in some respects.
That person will ask the questions I don't need to.
Yeah, I don't need to. So, or I'm not going to read that because I don't understand it, so I don't need to. Or, finance is my big nemesis. And I want to understand school finance, especially maintained schools, more, not just in terms of the numbers, but the infrastructure around it, the relationship with the local authority and all of that. I want to understand that. So being the only one in the room is not necessarily a bad thing. It depends on the context and how you approach that situation. So my advice to anybody who currently is the only one in the room or feels like they're the only one in the room is to lean all the way in and just make your presence known.
So what would be your takeaway from what we've discussed? Your one takeaway from what we've discussed in this topic or around this topic?
My one takeaway,
or would it be what you've just said?
I think it would be what I've said, and I say that to myself as well. I don't currently have an additional responsibility in the school that I govern in, but I'm also on a board for a diocesan board, and I've got the feeling that they're about to land me with a responsibility. So you've also got to think about your capacity, but to get the best out of your role as a governor, take on an additional responsibility. And instead of then having a situation where governing bodies are scrapping around for people to fill these roles, they'll have almost like a waiting list, and that in itself will make a difference to the whole structure. If you've got not only a chair and a vice chair, but you've got a link governor for safeguarding and almost one shadowing and in the wings, and you make it all part of your succession plan, that's a strong governing body.
I would say my takeaway would be to kind of similar something that you said about being the only one could actually be a strength. But I would say sometimes see being the only one as the only one who doesn't know something in the room, because then that's shows true. That you're willing to learn. And
that can also show the challenge, because sometimes if you've got all the same people who have been there for ages, you could end up having a rubber stamping board. But if you've got somebody new who doesn't know and they're questioning, then that is adding the challenge. So that's a good thing.
So I would say definitely know that if you don't know something, for example, one of the schools that I'm a governor at, you have to join 2 committees. And I knew from the outset that I would join one. That was my comfort in a way. The thing that I knew about. The thing that even though I would still be learning how it works in this context, I know I would be comfortable in those conversations. It wouldn't be talking about anything that will throw me off. And the other one would be a challenge. So comfort and challenge. So if you've got a pair of those. So the challenge was, the comfort was teaching and learning, which I then became chair. So that was my challenge within my comfort. And the challenge one is finance, because, being young, but I knew that...
It's got nothing to do with age, because I hate finance too.
No, I know, but I mean, like, you're talking about million pound organisations.
In a secondary school, it's definitely multi-million.
I joined that one knowing that there was so much I would need to learn. And that's when I would sit around the table, and even in the first meeting, I may not have asked a lot of questions. I learned how to ask questions because I didn't know how to ask questions.
Okay, you got to unpick that a bit.
Okay, so I listened to the other governors, how they asked questions, the details that they focused on, and then it was like, okay, now that I've listened to how they've asked questions, then those same questions I can then ask when I'm in a different space. So because I didn't know how to ask questions, I learned how to from the other governors who did.
Right. So instead of being in a situation where you're fearful because it seems like everyone else is asking questions, use that as a learning opportunity.
Yes.
Okay, those are the kind of questions that they ask.
Yes.
So if it's about data, about performance, about disadvantaged groups, about non-disadvantaged groups, how can in the next meeting, because you get the same data, just different figures. Really,
exactly.
It's the same report, just different. It's just an update of the last report. So how has that changed in between the reports? And those questions can almost be repeated.
Cycle round.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but it's just a different governor who's asking this time, and then over time, it's just recognizing that over time you will refine your questioning style, and it will become more targeted and strategic and things. But in the first instance, just put yourself in the space and then figure it out.
And there's no such thing as a dumb question anyway.
No, exactly.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Please rate, review, and subscribe via your preferred streaming platform. The Governor's Podcast is a brand of the legal entity Education Governance Solutions Limited, and a free training resource for anyone. So if you know someone who is interested in becoming a governor or a trustee, please share this podcast with them. And if you'd like to get in touch with us directly with questions or comments, then drop us an email at thegovernorspodcast governorspodcast@gmail.com.
You can also follow us on social media platforms at The Governor's Podcast. Let's connect.